Good afternoon, members. As you can tell, we're in the council chamber, so we have to be on our extra special best behaviour today. Just start us off with welcome to the Audit Governance Accounts Committee meeting for Monday the 24th of February. Start with the usual procedures. We are not expecting any fire alarms, so in the event that the alarm goes off, then we need to make our way out using the fire exits, which are clearly signposted to the back there. Make our way out in orderly fashion and congregate in the entrance to War Memorial Park. Remind you all that the meeting is being webcast, and that is currently working. And then to receive apologies for absence. Don't currently have anything. Yeah, I'm going to say that's the resignation replacements, isn't it? Yeah. So, and then resignations and replacements, I have notification from Councillor Sherlock, who is for this meeting only being replaced by Councillor Tucker. Don't have anybody else at the moment, no? Okay. I do not have any declarations on conflict of interest or whipping decisions, I believe. Oh, I do. Councillor Leake.
As usual, declare that my daughter-in-law is employed by KPMG in Frankfurt. They're separate businesses, but I'll declare it.
Thank you. Any others? No. I have no urgent items, so that takes us on to paper A to confirm the minutes of last meeting. Right, Councillor Parker, then Councillor Harvey, and I have 4 minor grammatical changes in the papers already. So, Councillor Parker, with you first.
We'll take points on the minutes, is this, Chair? Thank you. Firstly, if I can say that there's a good possibility that I might have missed something on emails in regard to correspondence from this committee to the SLT and to the portfolio holder. But if I could refer to pages 6 of 82 under 6.1.13, it was agreed that the chairman would advise to the senior leadership team under the 3rd paragraph. And so my question would be, did the chair do that, and did we get a response?
You've spotted the obvious omission in terms of doing it via email, so there's a written record of it. I've had a conversation about it, but I've not written that down. So I will take an action to do it more formally outside of this meeting and then get a formal response as a matter of record.
Well, thank you, Chair. I think that's probably what those of us attending would have expected to happen. Can I then turn to page 7 of 82, under the paragraph headed Resolved, where it's the small b. The committee is assured that deficiencies in processes have now surfaced and will be addressed, but seeks assurance from the portfolio holder. Has that also been actioned? And for the record, would there be a written response from the Cabinet member?
The action has been acknowledged but not completed. So there is already work happening within the commissioning unit, and I think that's where we're expecting to get a more sort of full update. But I can again ask the portfolio holder to commit the response to an email. That would help by way of written record.
I think it would be, for an audit committee, the correct path to take. Thank you.
Your points are well made, Councillor Parker, and I will take that duly noted. I've got Councillor Harvey.
Just a quick one. I'm sure you've picked it up, but I would be remiss as the ward councillor not to get the Vine School spelled correctly. Sorry. And then on page 8 of 82, little b, just to chase up where that's going. So in terms of the report, so page 8 of 82, little b, the alternative working up of the information there and the processing of that. And Kevin can give us just where is that actually going and where can I look for it as an action.
Thank you, Chair. The Property Investment Strategy report is going to EPP in March, and reference and that elements will be picked up in that report. Well, the report will be an options report, so there will be options for members to discuss and consider across the wider piece, but including that particular element.
Councillor Leake.
5 of 82, resolution little c. I don't note any report on the Constitution Working Party.
Yes, I think we did say at the last session, and again at this one, we are waiting an update from the Constitutional Working Party. However, I did make the invitation for any members of that working party who were present and members of this committee, if they felt they wished to say something about the updated actions, they could do so. However, we do not have a formal report on the update of the CWP at this meeting. We will expect something at a future meeting. Again, it's been an item that's been on the agenda for some time. I'm happy to take any comment if anybody wishes to, but equally don't want to put anybody on the spot.
Will we carry that one forward so we don't forget?
Yes, it does keep coming back under the updated.
I, as you know, I wasn't in attendance at that particular meeting, but it does look like a specific resolution, and I would have thought there would have been a paper saying to be discussed at a future meeting or something.
Yeah, I think that's the position we're in. We just don't have the paper ready at this point in time because the Constitutional Working Party is still doing its work. So I take the point and we'll make sure it is, but it has been on the agenda for every meeting for the last 8 or 9 meetings, so it's just omitted this time. Yes, Councillor Keating, you're able to advise us.
Thank you, Chair. For my sins, I'm a member of the Constitutional Working Party as well as this committee. I see it as a bit like the Northern Ireland peace talks. Everything is agreed, but nothing is agreed until the end. But we have made substantial progress recently, very recently, and we're probably going to get a paper provided to us outlining the range of options that we have agreed in the next week or so. So I would anticipate us being able to report more fully at the next meeting of Arga. Thank you.
So I'll make sure it's on the agenda for the April meeting. Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on the minutes? So can I agree them as with the amendments to grammar and the Vine School, can I agree them on your behalf, members? Thank you. Item 8 on the agenda, I don't have any member public participation notified. I don't have any notification from the portfolio holder wishing to speak, nor do I have any referrals from other committees or the council, or indeed issues referred by cabinet, and nor do I have anything on item 12, single issue panels update. Item 13, the standing item, use of regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000. And the committee is requested to note that since the last meeting of the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee, there have been no requests or authorisations granted for either directed surveillance or covert human intelligence source. Are we happy to note that, members? Thank you. Which takes me neatly onto item 14 and paper B in your packs. And this is a report by our auditors, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And if I ask our audit colleagues to, I would say, to introduce themselves and to introduce the report as well, please. Anna, thank you.
So the The first report you've got is the report on the work we do, certifying 2 grant claims that the organisation makes every year. And Dan's going to take you briefly through that report. It's not working.
Great, thanks Anna. So hopefully everybody's got a copy. Unfortunately, I don't think we've got the same numbering as you, so I'll be referring to our page numbers. Hopefully, I'll be able to work our way through. So if we open to the first page, we've just got an introductory letter there, just summarising the results of the work that we've done. As you'll see, there's a section there that say, we ask the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee to consider the adequacy of the proposed management action plan for 2012-13 set out in Appendix B, and the adequacy of progress made implementing the prior year action plan in Appendix C. So we'll come into those in a couple of minutes. I'll just go through the main findings within our work, first of all, which is on the following pages. So the first page to turn you to is our page number 4, which is the introduction. And I just want to point you to the section that talks about the scope of the work, because there's an important caveat in a sense in there, which says that our work involves applying prescribed tests, which are designed to give reasonable assurance that claims and returns are fairly stated in accordance with the specified terms and conditions. Where this is not the case, matters are raised within a qualification letter. It's important to say that because the methodology that we used is pre-prescribed to us. And one of the things about that is that if we find any errors, no matter how small they are, we have to report them, which is why when we come on to the actual results of our work, even though they seem such small errors, it's because of the methodology we have to work to. So if I move us on to the results of the certification work section. So on page 6, we've got a very high-level summary of what the results of our work was. Firstly, the national non-domestic rates return. We're pleased to say that there were no issues found with that and no amendments made to the claim. However, on our housing and council tax benefits scheme work, we did find a number of errors. So those are what I'll go on to now, which are on the following pages. And sets out the main errors that we noted within our work. The first is to do with rent rebates, so non-HRA. There you'll see that we found a number of different errors, and we put there towards the bottom of that section, we state extension testing was performed by the authority in respect of each of the above matters. We're pleased to report that this testing was of good quality and no issues arose from our re-performance of an element of this work. So what we're saying there, what we're saying there is that on that particular section, we had to do a bit more work, but we found that everything was in order. The second section was to do with rent allowances, and we found in our initial set of testing one error where there was an underpayment by £8.48. And this is going back to my initial introduction. Although that seems very small, it did mean we had to go and do further testing. And once we'd done another 40 cases, we identified an additional 4 errors. And from that, we couldn't take comfort that the amounts recorded on the system were correct. And because of that, as we've written there, even significant additional work would have resulted in an amendment that would have allowed us to conclude that the claim is fairly stated. So in other words, no matter how much extra work we did, we didn't think we were going to be able to get to the point where we could say that the claim was correct. And then moving on to page 8, there are also 2 cross-cutting issues. So the way the system is set up, on a yearly basis, parameters have to be put into the system which help in the calculation of the amounts of benefit that people received. We found 2 errors within that. Some of the parameters had not been included, although they're parameters not used by the council. The other one is that the parameter uprating, what should happen is that the actual figures are put into the system. Instead, what had been put in is a percentage uplift on each one of those. Those are things that we had to report within our qualification letter as well. So those were the overall findings, and as I said, it's actually the appendices that we want to get your confirmation that you're happy over what has been said, especially Appendix B and C. They give the management action plan and also the results of our follow-up from the work a year ago. In all cases, we're satisfied that the management response should resolve these issues so that next year's claim hopefully won't end up having the same issues. But as I said, what we wanted to check is that you're happy with that, and to take any comments on the paper.
Thank you. Can I start before I've got two already signalled to ask questions, but can I just start with a quick question for my benefit? Of the actions in appendices B and C, which are expected to be completed by the end of this month, when is it that you will check that those actions have been completed?
We don't come back and do any more work on the certification until July time, so it wouldn't be until then that we would expect to formally follow those up.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Keating, I think, first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was concerned not to be able to satisfy myself that I could understand the relevant level of errors versus the total volume. You identified a range of errors, but you haven't identified the range of activity that you're investigating. For example, there's 20,000 cases a year, and you've looked at 10, and you've got errors of. That kind of general overall picture, I believe, is an essential ingredient of a report such as this. It gives the reader the ability to have a quick appreciation of the relevant level of errors versus throughput. That's the first point, if I may. The second point I wanted to identify is, I don't know when this was written, but it was obviously written before this week. But the management action plans identify this week as the date to finalize matters. Now, is there any way of updating us in relation to the management action plans and the final date, which is the end of February, which is this week? Is there any way of doing that? And sorry, yeah, those are the points I wanted to make. Thank you.
To take your first point about numbers of cases, I don't know how many cases, but I can tell you that when we audited the housing benefit and council tax grant claim, that amounts to, I think the number in here is about 58 million. We audited cases of £160,000 in total, so a very small proportion, and we found errors of about £124, just to put that into perspective for you, but I understand you don't necessarily have that all written here. So the numbers are, relatively speaking, very small. It's not uncommon, I would say, to find errors of a small value in a grant claim, and you won't be the only authority who has had issues with its housing benefit grant claim this year. It's quite common because of the way in which we have to do it, and the concept of materiality that we apply to the rest of our work doesn't apply here. To take your second point,
the point I was making was that the picture is not shown, but what you are showing is you've looked at this bit of the picture. What I'm simply suggesting, to make it comprehensive and intelligible to lay persons, you ought to provide a sentence or two to give the overall picture. Now, if that's too difficult, I'm sure we could find different auditors to do that.
I don't think there's need for the inference, Councillor Keating, but the point is, yeah, I think the point is that to help sort of with the reading, a line of context would be helpful, given that members of the committee change, and it does actually help to have a complete picture. Is that possible within a reissue of this work?
we can provide you with that information. I can't reissue this specific report because it's a final report, but I can provide you with the information, absolutely.
That would be helpful. Again, if it's just a note in the future that we could have that context, I think it would help members. Thank you. And in relation to the second question?
As I said, the second point around whether those actions have been implemented or not is probably a question for the benefits team. It's not something I will have followed up yet.
Thank you. Councillor Leake.
Can I refer you to page 15 of 82, or 7 if you're with PwC? Under rent allowances, I think you've referred to this. It's the second paragraph, the first sentence. I don't really understand that statement. Given the nature of the population and the variation in the errors found, it is unlikely that even significant additional work would have resulted in an amendment that would have allowed us to conclude that the claim form is fairly stated. I don't understand what that means. It's probably because I'm very old and very thick, but I mean, is it fairly stated or isn't it fairly stated?
We're saying we don't know. So what we've done is tested some rent allowances, found an error. So we tested 40, we sample tested 40, found an error. So when that happens, we decide whether or not we should do more work to see if it's just one isolated error or lots of errors. So we did more work, found more errors, and therefore decided that at that point, it was very likely there was no point in doing any more work, because having tested the amount we tested to that point, we'd already found 5 errors. So statistically, it was likely there were more errors. Therefore, we concluded there was no point in doing any more work. So what we're saying is we can't give you the assurance that it is fairly stated.
But having regard to the relatively modest amounts, indeed extremely modest amounts that you have found, by normal standards, and I know you've said that the normal auditing rules don't apply here, but I mean, it does seem to me quite extraordinary that this government, which is looking to save money, allows us to spend £30,000 looking at very small errors, when in the next paper we see that we were cheated out of 275,000 by fraud. I mean, it just seems to be, I know it's not your fault, you're merely doing what you're told, but I do think somehow we need to ask the government why it is we are being asked to spend 30,000 quid on these trivial errors which are inevitable. I mean, any set of accounts you're going to find errors, I feel sure, you know, that's the nature of humans working with numbers. And yet we see that we've got this vast amount we've lost through false claims. That's the place that we should be really working on, but I don't know how we comment to the government.
Certainly on your second point with the fraudulent claims, I think we will pick that up in both papers C and D. I'm not quite sure how we tell the government we don't like the way it's managing its audits.
Could I ask members, do other members agree with me that spending £30,000 to find that somebody's overpaid by £9.28 is just a waste of time and money?
Yeah, Councillor Gardner.
We haven't spent £30,000 finding out that we have small errors. We have spent £30,000 ensuring that we haven't lost considerably more. This is the object of the exercise, to give assurance that these are, if not fairly stated, then at least reasonably accurately stated. There may well be cases where audits are carried out where they're not reasonably accurately stated. So I think the quibble is not over £30,000, it's over the extra £6,000 which was spent on the additional work, having found that there were small errors. Not 30,000, but 6 is what we're quibbling about, and as we've been told, the government say it has got to be correct. When it says fair, it doesn't actually mean fair, it means correct. So I don't think I'm going to support what John had to say.
Okay. Councillor Watts, do you have a point on this one? I know you're still to come back with questions.
Councillor Gardner said exactly what I was going to say on this one, and I've realised my other points about the audit plan anyway, so.
Thank you. Councillor Keating, you had a point on this?
Thank you, Chair. In supporting Councillor Leake, I'm happy that proportionate action seems to be left at the door in response to looking at accounts and having to, if you find an error in £100 million business of £8, you have to examine further. There needs to be proportionality here, and I believe it's not proportional to effectively identify minuscule, trivial, and I don't mean unimportant, because taxpayers' money is always important, but to spend extra money having identified relatively small petty cash style issues is overkill, in my view. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my point, again, in support of Councillor Leake and Councillor Keating, is that not so much the point they've made themselves, but the issue of the internal picking up of this. Because, I appreciate you're coming in and you're doing a job and the government will set down the responsibilities. But if our internal processes were sharp enough, where are they in the context of picking up on this, such that, I've got to be honest, I'd rather spend the 30 grand on the CAB, because I know they're 30 grand short this year. That's where I'd like to see taxpayers' money spent, appreciating that we've got to do these things to be clear. I appreciate that. I'm not disagreeing with my other two colleagues either, in terms of your point. But it's just, for me then, if it is this level of error, then where are we in terms of our internal processes picking up on these, such that we then don't have to spend the extra. We don't have to have PwC do that on top of. And that would be my question, really. And I don't know whether Kenny can answer that, or whether that's something that we need to take back for a further piece of just having a look.
Yeah, I think perhaps you can help us with some thoughts or suggestions.
I'll try, Chair. In terms of internal processes, well, there was an internal audit of housing benefit, which was full assurance. So I think our internal, from memory, it was full assurance anyway. Our internal processes are pretty good, I think. Just to put, you've had the context, but the rent allowance bit, it's £49.5 million over 11,500 cases, of which the initial testing found one case at £8.49. So, that's, and I think in terms of the response, we obviously have to write to the government and give an explanation. The service have done that, and the government have accepted that explanation. There was no change to the grant claim or the amount paid or due as a result of any of this. So all of those numbers that were originally there went through in the same way. They might have changed cells in a couple of instances, but the amount that the council claimed back and the amounts that the council paid didn't vary as a result of this. Your points about can we do anything about it? Well, the government do have not a scheme, but they do have a process for red tape and information between central government and local government. And maybe I was going to suggest the Chair, we could draft a letter from the committee to that saying the government really ought to be looking at its approach to grant claims where it's this 100% full, any error, you have to go through this extra testing approach. Because why isn't there a de minimis? I share your views entirely. Everything else we operate on has a de minimis level, but this doesn't. In terms of other processes, so finally, Chair, other processes, I know, for example, the service that are actively going through those areas, and for example, they've had the software supplier in to do a look at our parameters and our setups, and they found no major issues in doing that. So they've already had the company come in, look and do an audit of how we're operating the system to try and improve it where possible. So they're being proactive in responding to this.
Just one very quick point. All of that is costing money. So if we brought them in, that costs us money. This context of where we spend the resource is really important.
So, Councillor Leake, before I
I was just going to say they could save an awful lot of money by not having a cabinet meeting in Aberdeen.
So if I bring that to a steady close, members, is it the wish of this? Hang on. Is it the wish of this committee to take up Kevin's suggestion of a letter through the red tape line or whatever? Yeah. And I think there's also an action there, maybe that we just follow up with the head of service. They're content these actions are complete within the timescale set out in the report. And Kevin assures us that actions are in progress. But I think it would be helpful if we just had a one-line, not a report, a one-line feedback at our next meeting that was the case, because there's quite a big gap otherwise between now and when the auditors are next in. Councillor Parker.
Just want to make certain, Chair, then, that the letter that is sent is copied into committee members.
Yes, I think you've had a helpful point this time, which, yes, I'll make sure there's an appropriate audit trail for that. Thank you. Anything further on this paper? No? Oh, Councillor Watts. Can you put your mic on, Councillor?
Sorry, I'm forgetting where I am. Page 19 of 82, benefits manager is to report by the end of February, which is very soon. Will that report come to this committee?
No, I don't think the report will come to this committee, but what we've just said is that given there's quite a gap between when this report's been put forward and when we next hear from our external auditors, which will be in July, we will ask the head of service to just assure us in a note at the next committee that these actions have been completed. Tucker.
Thank you. It's, I assume, just a typo on 30 of 82 on paper C. Sorry?
13?
Oh, she said on this report.
13 or 30?
30.
30. No,
On C.
No, we're
sorry, I thought you said
we're
this
just
report.
about to introduce the next report. Sorry,
Sorry.
you're jumping ahead of us. But you'll be next at the next questions. Thank you. So that concludes paper B and takes us on to paper C. And again, I shall ask our auditors to introduce the paper C for us.
So paper C is the draft external audit plan for 2013-14. I will work off the assumption you've read it, but take you through the important part, which I think is the audit approach part, which starts on page 3, has a big title, says audit approach. I'm not sure what page number you're all on, but hopefully that's relatively straightforward. Okay, good. So what the audit approach section of the plan does is tell you about the significant risks to the audit. Those significant risks drive where we will spend the majority of the time when we do the audit. So in terms of what we get concerned about in doing the audit, these are the things that I think you need to know. So on the bottom of page 3, you've got a significant risk around the management override of controls. You'll remember we've talked about this before. This is the whole reason you have auditors. If you didn't need auditors and could always trust officers and or managers to do the right thing, you wouldn't necessarily need us auditors because everyone would just do as they were meant to do. Management override of controls is about making sure that the financial statements the council produces are an accurate reflection of the council's financial position and that nothing has been done to those financial statements to manipulate them to say something that they shouldn't say. So they haven't made the net cost of services bigger or smaller, or they haven't put assets and liabilities on the balance sheet that are at the wrong value or, for example, don't exist. The main way we do that work is through looking at manual journals. Those are manual adjustments to the council's financial system, because that is it is most likely how management would change the numbers that are reported to the council. So we do a lot of work around journals. We do a piece of work particularly to make sure we have a complete population of all the journals so that management haven't hidden any, for example. So we do quite a lot of work around that. And we make sure we understand the rationale for the material journals that have gone through the accounts. We also look at anything where there is management estimates made. So where there isn't an absolute precise number for a balance or a transaction in the accounts, and management have had to exercise some judgment, we particularly focus our work on those areas to make sure that management haven't put any bias into those estimates. So that's a significant risk on this audit. It's a significant risk on any financial statement statutory audit. because auditing standards say it should be. So it's not unique to you. It's a significant risk on any audit. If you turn over, there is also another significant risk, which is in relation to fraud and the recognition of income and expenditure. Again, auditing standards say the recognition of revenue, so income, is a significant risk on any audit. We extend that presumption to expenditure in the public sector because actually it's more difficult for you to manipulate income. It would be easier for you to manipulate your expenditure. So if management wanted to, again, manipulate the accounts, they might do things like put too much expenditure in one year so they could make next year easier, for example. So that risk reflects the fact that we do extra work around how you're recognising income and expenditure. As I said, auditing standards say the risk of revenue exists for all audits, but we extend that presumption to expenditure in the public sector. So again, we do that work around looking at when you have recognised income, so making sure it's in the right period. We look at estimates for income and expenditure, but we also look at how income and expenditure sort of fluctuates over years and throughout the year as well. So we do a lot of work around that. The other risk that we've got highlighted in the plan is not a significant risk, but it's not what we would call a normal risk. It's an elevated risk. So it's not significant, but it does drive a lot of work during the audit, and that's the valuation of your property, plant and equipment. So you have a very large balance in your books. It's probably the largest balance in the books in relation to buildings that you own. And it's whether those buildings might be buildings that you use to provide council services from, or they're your investment properties. Valuations, by their very nature, are not precise. They are an art more than they are a science. So there is a lot of management judgment involved in valuing a portfolio of properties. So we treat that as higher risk than some of the other areas of the audit because we need to be comfortable that you've made the right judgments. So that's an elevated risk. It's quite common for that to be an elevated risk when we're auditing organisations with big asset bases, because as I said, valuations are not scientific, they are open to judgment. So those are the key risks for the audit. Those drive then what we do during the course of the audit. If you turn over to page 5, there are some other risks that we have considered as part of the planning work, but at this point don't consider to be significant. They're highlighted there for you, and they are issues that we will keep an eye on as the year finishes and in the run-up to doing the audit. Having looked at them with management and spent some time thinking about them, we don't think they're significant risks, but happy to take any comments or thoughts you've got on those if you would like to. And just turning over to page 6, we've very explicitly told you what materiality is this year. I'm not sure we've done that before, but we've very explicitly told you what materiality is. I would remind you that materiality is a number, but it is also qualitative. So we might identify areas in the course of our work that even if they weren't material, we would tell you about anyway. So for example, if we'd identified a fraud and it wasn't material, we would still report that to you regardless of the amount of materiality. The other thing that we don't really apply materiality to is related parties. So if we identify related parties that the council hasn't told us about, we don't apply the concept of materiality to those. But related parties are very much linked to fraud, and part of our responsibility is to make sure you have got a complete list of related parties. There was an issue last year that we identified around how you were making sure that all of the registered interests of everybody had been traced through to make sure there had been no transactions with those organisations. We've talked to Kevin and the team about what we need to do just to tidy that loop off, so we're quite confident that issue won't happen again. We've got in here the level of triviality. So this is the amount over which, if we identify errors, we will report to you. It's 5% of materiality, so it's a relatively standard calculation. So anything that's over £95,000, we would report to this committee. That's not saying errors below that aren't important, but if we were to report every single error we identified, coming back to our early discussion, you'd have quite a long list, which wouldn't necessarily be helpful in the context of us or you trying to sign a set of accounts that are materially correct. You need to be comfortable that that number is a number you're comfortable with. It's consistent with what we've had in previous years, but it is for the committee really to decide if it wanted a different number. You couldn't have a higher number. You could have a lower number. You can't put it up. You can put it down if you wanted to. I wasn't going to say anything else about the rest of the plan because I'm conscious it's quite a long document and you might have questions. So I'm more than happy to take those.
Councillor Tucker, now's your time. Do you want to stick your mic on for me? Oh, sorry.
Page 4, under elevated, there's the first dash. It says agreed, and I'm sure it doesn't mean that. It just means agree, the source.
Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. I've got two questions. Page 30 of 82, the first bullet point. 30 of 82, the first bullet point.
You're page 5.
Yeah, page 5, sorry. Thank you, Stu, thank you. Forgive me. Yeah, you're page 5. In terms of the planning, what I'm interested in is the first question is obviously the level of risk associated with the fact of planning appeals. Now, you were saying in your spiel that effectively, that's not a risk, but we are talking about significant monies here in terms of lost appeals. So I just want to understand the balance of that, of where you're saying it isn't a risk, but in the context of this council, the number of planning appeals that are being given by Secretary of State and their costs incurred are significant sums of money. And my second question relates to, and I don't know where it would fit in the plan and how it would fit here, but we've had a very serious issue with the moles this year, and somewhere financially, somewhere within an audit, it needs to be picked up, doesn't it? The risk, and I'm surprised it wasn't raised by officers, because if it was me, I would want that to be, I'm wondering why it wasn't, that obviously that incurred huge costs to this council, and that would need picking up. And I don't understand why it wasn't. It may not be appropriate here, it may be another piece of your work, I may have completely misunderstood it, but I thought it should be here.
Just to clarify, do you mean moles as in small furry animals who make...
No, shopping malls.
Oh, sorry. But you said moles, and I was...
The mals, if you want to sort it, the mals, by another way.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Right. So I shall pick up your first point about planning appeals. What I need to be comfortable is whether you have accurately captured all of the expenditure associated with those planning appeals in the books or not. So whilst you're carrying a financial risk, which I understand you're very concerned about, what I need to make sure is that you have accurately reflected that expenditure and any associated liabilities in the books. And my understanding from when I spoke to officers is that isn't a material number. So if materiality is 1.9 million, we aren't talking about a number anywhere near that significant. And as long as you have accounted for that number correctly, I will be perfectly comfortable. So I understand the financial risk part, but in terms of auditing it for me, the important thing for us will to be understand how much is it and have you had to estimate any of it. If you've had to make an estimate because there will have been decisions that have been made by the 31st of March, but that perhaps you don't know the full costs of, that's what I'm going to need to make sure is right. But at this point, I'm not expecting that to be a number that is material to the accounts. Therefore, it doesn't drive it will drive some work, but not a significant amount of work. Does that help? And on the issue of the MALs, the things that we look at for that would be particularly around the valuation. So I would be keen to understand the valuation of that asset at the end of the year, given you've spent a significant amount of money on it. I'm aware that last year we had a contingent liability in the accounts that said there was a dispute with the contractor, and at the point of signing last year's accounts, we didn't know and you didn't know what the liability was likely to be. Now, if that has since resolved itself, again, I will need to make sure you have properly accounted for it. But providing I can do that, again, whilst it's a financial risk for you in auditing terms, it's relatively straightforward. Does that? Yeah.
Councillor Keating next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at your page 5, other risks. Under the centre paragraph, business with collection, I'm aware, in a general type of sense, that there is the incidence of business rate risks and fraud. It's there. I'm not measuring the values or whatever. And non-domestic rate income versus expenditure, etc. And I would have thought that that particular paragraph would benefit from mentioning the need to monitor business rate and non-domestic rate fraud equally as well as domestic rate fraud. Have I made myself clear? Thank you.
I don't disagree with you. I suspect there is fraud in relation to business rates. Strictly speaking, as long as you have got internal systems and processes for identifying that, it isn't my responsibility to identify it. So we will go about our work, and what we will do is look at the number that you've got in the accounts, and we will make sure that that is accurate and that there hasn't been any fraud from the council's perspective, as in the council perpetrating fraud. If other people are perpetrating fraud against the council, that's beyond my remit. I understand your point about the fraud, but that if someone is defrauding you, there is no way that I would be able to do any work around that, and that's not my responsibility is to make sure your books are correct. Does that make sense?
If I might respond, the answer is yes and no. It makes sense in one respect, but if your audit report approach includes monitoring whether or not there is fraud or overpayment or underpayment on domestic rates, we're now relatively new, but we're now new into the business rates. And I would have thought that there ought to be the same level of concern and consideration for fraud under those other elements. That's all I'm saying.
Can I?
And it does say it's under other risks. This is a new risk for us. Thank you.
Can I suggest that maybe you're right in it's a new risk for us to manage, but one of the other papers we have at the moment is paper D, which looks at fraud. We also have the benefit of our internal audit manager here, and maybe we deal with that at that point, because it sounds like it's something. Again, if our external auditor orders the process we have in place, I think the question is to ensure that we have a process in place for business rates in the same way that we have for domestic rates, and that's probably the point to pick it up in paper D, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. I've got Councillor Leake, Councillor Watson, and Councillor Gardner. So Councillor Leake.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to discuss the overall materiality. The numbers suggest that we're looking at expenditure of 100 million or 99 million something. It always strikes me that that's a rather odd number to take, because over half of it is actually the expenditure on housing benefits and council tax benefits, which comes in on the other side. And really our true expenditure is only about 40-something million. And now you could argue that the way that business rates are being collected and then paid out to the government is the equal and opposite to the government paying the council the housing benefits to us, and we distribute them. I just therefore question really whether we should be looking at 2% of 100 million or not 2% of 50 million, or whatever our true expenditure is. The other is just passing out money which is being handed to us for that purpose.
I take your point that you are collecting money and passing out on behalf of others. but I still have, those are numbers that I still have to audit. So generally you set materiality on the basis, for not-for-profit organisations, on the basis of total income or total expenditure. That's generally how you do it. And I completely understand your point that your true expenditure is less than that, but I still have to audit all of the expenditure.
I understand that, but this is such a significant figure. The materiality relating to our normal business, 2 million out of 50 makes it 4%, and it just seems to me that we should be, I believe that we should be looking at a lower number, because I think the 58 million is something totally different. There's an in and an out, just as there is with perhaps with the business rates or whatever. And I do think a materiality of 2 million on 50 is too high.
I'm happy to have another discussion about that, particularly with Kevin. There will be cost implications of significantly decreasing materiality, because what materiality does is drive how much work we have to do. So if you want materiality of £1 million and not 2, that's a significant burden on us and the finance team. And this is generally how we set materiality across our public sector clients, because I still have to audit all of the ins and the outs. But I do take your point.
And if the government suddenly decided that it would no longer require us to distribute council tax benefits and perhaps pass it to the county or some other authority, then we really would be looking at a much lower number. I think this, the 58 million is such a large number within the context of our accounts that I just don't feel comfortable, but I'm happy to listen to reasoned argument as to why costs should be compared to the additional costs should be compared to the loss of materiality.
The materiality doesn't just apply to the revenue expenditure income. The materiality applies to the balance sheet, and the balance sheet's 300 million. So it's around the impact that it will have on the understanding of the accounts for a reader of those accounts. It doesn't, as he explained, it doesn't impact on the auditor not reporting up errors or issues that they find, because if they find them, they will report them through to the committee regardless of the materiality level, as was explained. So it's about a reader of the accounts, understanding of those accounts, and the extent to which those accounts would need to be changed for a material error. And I think, under 2 million on a 300 million pound balance sheet is an appropriate materiality level.
In which case, why doesn't it say, it specifically says it's been set at 2% of expenditure. If you really want to argue that you should be looking at the balance sheet, then look at the balance sheet, and do bear in mind I am a former chartered accountant, so I know what I'm talking about.
Generally speaking, for public sector organisations, we don't use the balance sheet itself to determine materiality, and you only have, in days gone by, there used to be materiality for the income statement and materiality for the balance sheet. We don't do that anymore. We just have one level of materiality that applies to the whole accounts. And to take Kevin's point, £2 million in the context of your balance sheet is relatively small. It's just the way we now calculate materiality.
Given that this is a general rule applied, are there any other examples where someone flexes the level of materiality, or is this just standard practice across all similar authorities?
I couldn't comment for other audit firms because I don't work for them, but certainly within PwC there are a set of agreed benchmarks that are applied to our clients. They vary depending on the type of organisation. So if I was auditing a company, my materiality would be based probably on profit before tax, because actually that's more relevant in that situation. We don't use that in this context because it's not relevant, which is why we use total income or expenditure. So there are an agreed set of benchmarks for our public sector clients which are applied unless there is a risk-related reason specific to that organisation why it would change. And there are some specific circumstances, but generally this is what is applied.
Okay, and let me just explore this a minute. I'm not trying to be difficult. However, we were invited at the start to comment on overall materiality and the de minimis level. I believe the suggestion was they could go down but not up.
The audit committee needs to be comfortable with the reporting level of £95,000. The materiality is more my professional judgment. It's about how much you want reported to you in the course of the audit. So that £95,000 can go down. It can't go up because it is as a percentage of overall materiality. But if you were not comfortable with the 95 and you wanted a smaller number, you could do.
Okay, so bear with me. I'm just trying to help this along, because if we're invited to comment on something, there is a single comment that says, "Can we look at this again?" In light of the fact that we accept this as standard practice, and in light of Kevin's comments, I'm at a loss to see how we can move this forward unless we say, outside of this, we will look at it again and maybe come back with, you know, any further thoughts. Other than that, it stays as it is. But clearly, there's some view that says it might not need to stay as it is. On this point, Councillor Keating, please.
You can call it what you want. The reality is, if we're getting £58 million which we're disposing of in accordance with the arrangements made with government, I believe we have a duty to ensure that that is distributed legally, properly, and in timely manner, and it's public money, and I wouldn't wish any expenditure of public money via this council to be ignored in terms of materiality. Thank you.
Chairman, obviously nobody else is concerned. I'll withdraw the point.
Well, I think your comment should be noted as a concern. I'm just not sure how I can move it forward in this particular meeting, but I'm happy to look at it outside of that. Councillor Gardner?
On the point, if I understand it correctly, materiality at 95,000 is for reporting to this committee. I don't think it would be unreasonable if errors above 50,000 were reported to this committee. We're not saying they're not already identified, because they are, and they're reported to management. But it would pick up John's point that actually our expenditure is probably about half of the total in terms of what's going through. So if John did a proposal, I would propose that we actually set that figure at £50,000 rather than £95,000 for reporting to the committee. I don't believe that that will actually increase the amount of audit work significantly at all.
Would that help, Councillor Leake?
Well, it would clearly help, but I mean, would like Kevin to tell us what the consequences of that might be, and then it's a judgment as to whether we really want to pay a much higher audit fee to get the benefit of that. But mine was the overall materiality, because bearing in mind the overspend on the mouths would not be covered by, well, it probably would now, but no, it wouldn't be covered. I mean, there are other areas. I mean, it's not so long ago we had the many down land included in the valuation at about 1 point something million, which would mean that wasn't material.
I will ask perhaps Kevin to help us out here a second.
But it's back. The fact that you've got a materiality level there, and I'm sure Anna will correct me where I go wrong, but the fact that there's a materiality level there doesn't mean that if an issue comes to light, it will be identified, and it may well be when the accounts come to the committee, either I am recommending that we change, even though it's under the materiality level, that I'm recommending that the accounts are changed or that they have been changed to reflect that. All it means is that they don't have to be changed to reflect that. The committee will still see all of those things. So if it was something like a Mal's valuation and it was different between us by £1 million, there is still the ability to change the accounts for that. So the materiality level is about the understanding of the reader and what's appropriate in terms of work and effort to deliver that. So I think that the 1.977 is an appropriate materiality level, and to go lower than that does involve the auditor in additional cost and work. And I don't think that that is really justified, because the committee will see all of the information. And if I'm recommending that we don't change the accounts and you disagree with me, I'm sure you will instruct that the accounts are changed before you approve them. So there is a process in place that means you will see all of those issues. It doesn't mean that £1.9 million worth of expenditure is not looked at or doesn't feature. It's just about the presentation of the accounts and potential future changes to them. The clearly trivial reporting de minimis level, as I understand it, changing that level downwards won't involve additional work for the auditor, because they list all of those. I get a list of all of those items, and if the committee would like to see all of those that are above 50,000, then I have no problem with that. If that's the level you want to see, you'll see a range of items that would have been dealt with or not, as the case may be. But if that's what the committee wants, then 50,000, as I understand it, won't involve additional cost from the audit perspective.
The committee would like the clearly trivial limit to be £50,000. That's absolutely fine. This is one of the things, the reasons we bring the plan to you, to give you some say in what you would like to see. Materiality drives how much work we do on given balances, but it also helps us quantify if we identified errors up to £2 million. When we get into this discussion about how likely would we be to qualify the accounts, it doesn't mean big items of expenditure that are less than that don't get audited. So if the MAL's expenditure was a significant amount of expenditure, we would look at that anyway as part of our work on expenditure. It just drives the amount of work we need to do. And, when we get into discussions, if we find errors, where we draw the line about whether we might need to qualify the accounts or not.
Okay, thank you. So I think on this point, Councillor Parker? Oh.
I wanted to second Councillor Gardner's.
Thank you. I think what that gets us to is recording Councillor Leake's comment in respect of the overall materiality figure, agreeing to reduce the de minimis figure from 95,000 to 50,000. Is that what you agree, members? Yep, thank you. I still have Councillor Watts, Gardner and Keating. So Councillor Watts, it's your turn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Page 5 again, risks. Have you given any consideration to assessing as a risk the extent of reorganisation and extensive redundancies that have affected us? I could give as an example one case which I've actually inquired about through the full council, where in last financial year ending 2013, £20,000 was spent on a mentor for one post, and I don't know how much that has continued in the current financial year. Taking an example of one area I took a close interest in, I wonder across the organisation what risks we're facing as a result of having many people new to their work.
In relation to the accounts themselves, we would look at redundancy costs in the context of, have you accounted for them correctly? And particularly with redundancy costs, if you have made decisions before the end of the financial year but haven't paid out the money associated with those redundancies, that's something that we would look at to make sure you'd estimated it correctly. There are some very specific accounting standards about how you account for redundancy costs. My understanding from discussions with the officers is that there isn't any significant redundancies in 13-14 that you need to account for. We will do a little bit of work around making sure that's true. So, for example, we will read the minutes of meetings and those sorts of things to make sure you haven't discussed making people redundant and not told us. But from the account perspective of the opinion on the accounts, I don't think I'm not aware that it's a significant issue. To take your second point about, are you carrying risk as a result of reorganisation and lots of new people in new jobs, I'm sure you are, but that's largely outside the remit of what I'm required to do.
So would you look at unbudgeted amounts being spent in the way I illustrated?
We have a look at the budget to give us a sense of how you're performing, and particularly for the value for money part of the opinion. So not the opinion on the accounts, but the opinion on whether you're using your resources economically, efficiently and effectively. But I don't audit the budget. I audit the number that you report that you actually delivered at the end of the year. So we will look to understand why you might have overspent, to see if that means we need to do any more audit work on the actual numbers. But it isn't for me to comment on why you've overspent and whether that's appropriate or not.
Councillor Gardner.
Hopefully one last question before you go, and we get on to paper D. On pages 9 and 10, you talk about responsibility of the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee in respect of the risk of fraud. Can you elaborate on that before we actually discuss fraud in the following paper?
So my responsibility is to ensure that there have been no material frauds in year, and we do that through the course of our audit. So it's not our responsibility to identify every little tiny piece of fraud. So, for example, benefit fraud, which on an individual case by case it is quite small. It's not our responsibility to identify things like that. It's our responsibility to identify whether management particularly have perpetrated a fraud, which is why we go about our work around journals and around looking at estimates, those sorts of things. It's management's responsibility, just to be clear, to implement controls to prevent and detect fraud, and your internal auditors have a key role to play in that. Management have an important role around culture, making sure the tone at the top in the organisation is right. And management should also be performing a risk assessment to understand where your fraud risks are. Your responsibility as a committee is to evaluate whether management have put in place the right systems, processes and controls in relation to fraud, whether you're happy they've done everything they should do in terms of culture. So are they setting the right tone in the organisation? And it's also your attention, it's also your responsibility to ensure that if fraud is brought to your attention, for example through whistleblowers, that is appropriately investigated. So as a committee, you're responsible for ensuring management have put systems, processes and controls in place to prevent and detect fraud to the extent that they can do that. And obviously quite a lot of that's through your internal auditors. Does that answer your question?
You tell us what we need to do, but I'm not sure you've told us how we do it.
Oh, well, okay, how you do it. Right, so I think regularly, for the committee, for me it's about regularly talking to the internal auditors to find out what they're doing, how their work has been directed and controlled. So is Paul free to go off into the organisation and poke at all the bits of the organisation he wants to where he feels there is a fraud risk, for example? So I think having Paul here at the audit committee and being able to look him in the eye is really important. I think as members of the committee you need to be able to do that to get some assurance that Paul is able to go out into the council and discharge his responsibilities in respect of internal audit. I think looking at the results of the internal audit work is really important. So are there any red flags in there that would make you concerned about fraud? I think understanding for yourselves what systems and processes the council has in place. So how do you know that management aren't manipulating the accounts? Well, one way you know that is because you have us and we come and do some work around it. But I, as a councillor, would want to know what happens during the year. So again, that probably comes back to a conversation with Paul to find out what work he's doing around financial systems and processes and controls. I don't think there's any substitute for going out and asking people on the ground, you know, do you know where to report a fraud, or do you know how to blow the whistle? Those are the sorts of things I would do in terms of the how.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Keating, Harvey and then Parker. Keating?
Thank you, Chair. If you recollect, I did refer earlier and I was told, wait till we get to here. So can I say ditto, please? I believe very simply and very clearly in my head that because we have a well-established series of arrangements, both internal audit and external, in relation to monitoring the potential for fraud or actual fraud on housing benefits and matters of that nature, claims and disbursements, that we should have exactly the same standards for business rates and non-domestic rates. And if I could be reassured that that would be the case, I would be much comforted. But can I also say that I've just lost the point? If I may, I'll come back.
By all means. Councillor Harvey, you indicated.
Just a very quick question in relation to the comment about, in essence, HR and the redundancy issue that Councillor Watts raised. You know, you're looking through minutes for the accuracy of that. I would be intrigued to know whether or not our processes actually in the minutes of HR do that, considering the changes that have taken place in HR. And that would be an open question. I would stand to be corrected, but I would be surprised if we do it in such a way that if you read the minutes of HR, you would get the information you need to have the confidence you're looking for in that area. But I stand to be corrected on that. If it is the case, it's all well and good. If it isn't the case, then that's something that someone needs to take away from here, and that we need HR to be aware of, that they do need to have that reported to them in a way that they can satisfy our external auditors.
When I made the comment about reading minutes of meetings and things, what we generally do is, so Kevin and I will have a discussion and he'll say we haven't made anybody redundant or we don't need any provisions. What we will then do is go away and read the minutes of the council meetings, the cabinet meetings and the important subcommittee meetings to understand if you have discussed the generic principle of making anybody redundant or a specific reorganisation programme such that it would wave a red flag to me that says, ooh, they might need a redundancy provision. We would also go and talk to HR to understand from them if they have any expectation that you're making anybody redundant as well.
Sorry, you're not on, Paul.
One of a bone of contention that we as a group, and I know others have raised, has been the reorganisations in this place that have not gone through formal decision-making processes because the head of paid service and others have implemented them as a matter of course of their perceived responsibilities. Now, that may be all about, I'm not suggesting anything wrong with that. All I'm suggesting is if you're looking for a formal council process or a minute or a meeting or a subcommittee where we as democratic representatives have overseen that or had any influence over that, I'd be surprised if you find it. And my concern is that those things have happened. There is an interesting issue here of an audit trail. So where do we find that? Where do you see that? And where do we have confidence that you will be able to see that?
In that situation, and knowing what you've just told us, we will go about it a different way. So we will go and look at payroll reports, for example, that would, for example, might flag that people have been made redundancy payments. So if you're sitting here saying you wouldn't get that from council minutes, then I won't do that. I'll go and do it another way. So that's helpful information for me. I will go and search for it a different way.
Okay, did you want to?
Only one point, Chair, but which is that there is an annual report to HR committee that lists the actual expenditure on redundancies. So there is and that's a report that goes before the audit is closed. So there is at least that one report that says the list of the redundancy costs.
Thank you, Councillor Keating. Your memory return.
Thank you very much, Chair. The point I was going to make is related to this particular discussion in that I'm aware of some people who will go to industrial tribunals currently, and there could well be both a significant financial risk and reputational risk as well. And do you follow through on that kind of thing?
One of the things we do during the course of the audit is look to identify whether your liabilities are complete. And when I say complete, I mean, have you accounted for everything that you should be accounting for? So to take your point, if you've got an industrial tribunal that's going on, and there's a high likelihood that that isn't going to find in your favour, and there are costs associated with that, the council needs to think through whether there should be a liability in the books or not. And then if there was, we would need to audit it, but we would also need to audit if there wasn't, because part of my job is to make sure everything that should be in the accounts is in, not just everything is in. So what we will do as part of the work at the end of the year is talk to the legal team about industrial tribunals, anybody who's threatening to sue you, generally, not just industrial tribunals, anybody might be threatening to sue you, understand where those individual cases are, when decisions will be made, and also understand any legal advice you've been given about the likelihood you will win or you will lose, because that will then trigger an assessment of whether you have a liability at the end of the year or not. So if legal advice says it's fine, there's a 25% chance you'll lose, but actually we're pretty sure you'll win, you probably don't need to make a provision, but you might have a lawyer saying, actually, it's quite likely you're going to lose, and therefore you might need to have a liability. So we do all of that work to make sure that the liabilities in the accounts are the right liabilities.
Councillor Parker, I have you last.
Thank you, Chair. Can I advance to page 12? Fees. At the point when we were discussing materiality and the potential for limits to have been revised, there was the indication that in a certain situation that would incur further work and then there would be an adjustment to our fee. The question that I wanted just to ask, Chair, was on the basis of the fees that we pay to the auditors, is there some sort of, in simple terms, shall I say, an invoice that tells us how many staff hours we've received to quantify and justify that fee?
The short answer to that is no, because I don't decide what the audit fee is. The audit fee is set by the Audit Commission. So they set your fee using a formula which is a standard fee plus a percentage of expenditure. So that fee, I don't get to determine that fee at all. That is the fee for auditing Basingstoke Council determined by the Audit Commission. So I don't send you an invoice at the end of the year with man hours in.
And I struggle to understand how in the early part of the discussion there was a suggestion that there would be a need for you to adjust the fee because of additional work.
The Audit Commission sets the fee, and this is the fee for a normal risk organisation. The Audit Commission and us, in agreement with a council, can vary that fee to up to 30% more if we think that's necessary. So if we've got a council, for example, that has a lot of significant risks, perhaps because it's massively overspending or it's doing a very significant transaction, there is scope to increase the fee. If you sat here and said you wanted to halve materiality, that increases the amount of work I need to do. So then I'd have to go to the Audit Commission and tell them that, and they would have to agree whether I was allowed to increase the fee or not. But I can't do that without talking to the Audit Commission.
So that I better understand then, in the context of the conversation or the points that were being raised by Councillor Leeks, was that, so Councillor Leek, I do apologise, that it was more something for discussion rather than necessarily you saying, there could have been a discussion that we could have had, it could have been had, and we could have arrived at an agreement maybe. Another question, Chair, thank you. If I then can go on to page 22, which introduces the, what's the phrase, offshored for some of our work, and introduces that in line with other firms and what happens in the commercial world, some of the audit work could be carried out delivered to through delivery centres in India and Poland. And then further down it talks about Germany. It refers us to the letter later on, which appears on starts page 24, ends on page 25. From the note to the letter, I'm actually confused, and I'd seek clarification. Is any of this local authorities' work outsourced to India and Poland, or is it only outsourced to Germany?
None of it will go to India. It will only go to Germany.
I don't think that's clear then in the report, and I'd ask that it's made a stronger point.
Is there a case of what we've got in the report is a standard term in any report, and the letter qualifies a situation for us? Yeah, but there is a bullet point at the bottom which qualifies that. Yeah.
So that's probably partly my updating of the two things. What it's saying on that first section is that the Audit Commission has given us permission to outsource it to India and Poland as well. For the work specifically at Basingstoke, having had conversation with management, we are only going to be using our centre in Germany. And actually that centre in Germany is purely going to be used for storage of deliverables from the council. It's basically a server that sits there with information that's been supplied. So there's actually no offshoring of council work to those particular places.
Councillor Parker, come back.
Is that what the letter says?
Councillor Parker.
Okay, I take one aspect of the report to be a note to the report, and the letter, which appears on page 24 to page 25, is effectively what I would assume is what's saying this is what's happening in respect of your authority. Is that not the case? I've got a head shaking from Kevin, but then I don't understand why we have a note to the report and we have a reference in that note to the letter. It would appear to me that referring in the note to the letter is by way of explanation and clarification as to what is happening in this local authority. I just want to drill down and make sure that we do have this properly identified, what's happening in the case of Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council with regard to offshoring work to these geographical territories.
I'll ask Kevin to clarify, and then maybe we can make any amendment where necessary to make sure it's explicit.
Yeah, I think that, as Dan was saying, that the paragraph at the beginning in the report on page 22 of the PwC report, which is 47 of 82, where it talks about overseas processing of information. That's the standard phraseology that then refers to the letter that says that there can be out offshore into those particular. So that's the standard bit, and as Dan said, that standard bit hasn't been amended, but it says we confirm that. So the part that's in paper C is the audit plan, is what the auditors will be doing for us, and within that we got added in that bullet point that says for the audit work in relation to Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council, we will only distribute information to our centres in Germany and the UK. So that's the bit that applies to us for this audit.
Yeah,
I'm sorry about this, but in the letter, it actually states, in the letter to Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council, private and confidential, pages 24, pages 25, as a result of this tender, suppliers have sought for opportunities to increase efficiency whilst maintaining a level of quality. It goes on to say, one principle which has recently been established is that certain basic parts of the audit can be offshore. It goes on then to say on the paragraph starting on the page 25, recently as with other firms, it has been agreed under which data can be offshored, PwC service delivery centres in Poland and our client Connect service based in Germany. doesn't state in that this hasn't happened in the case of this authority. It's still not, it's still, in my view, quite ambiguous.
Yeah, I believe what we have here is what the lawyers call a battle of the forms. Which statement is relevant to this authority? And I believe that's been explained. It is the statement on page 22. However, the inclusion of the standard letter is creating the battle of the forms. And we need to be explicit within the document, or, you know, to some extent the letter is irrelevant to our circumstances because you've clarified it in the document. So if you can
Update the letter
Thank
so it is consistent with the earlier paragraph.
Yeah, thank you. Either way, it just helps be explicit.
Thank you, Chair. Accuracy is always a good thing.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Councillor Keating. You're next, yes?
Thank you, Chair. I'm specifically referring to your page 21. And I can honestly say I was genuinely shocked to read under the title Electronic Communication, during the engagement, you, the PwC, may from time to time communicate directly with each other. However, the electronic transmission cannot be guaranteed. Can't be guaranteed to be secure, virus or error-free, and such information could be intercepted, corrupted, lost, or destroyed. That doesn't give me any confidence in your lot. Now, I understand it may well be just a standard phrase. I understand that. But any standard phrase which says, we pay you 100 grand and you take no responsibility whatsoever for the security of the information that you're using, which is our information, seems to me to be absolutely ludicrous. If the problem is security, why don't you come here within the confines of our premises, within the confines of our security, and communicate with us? You don't need to go elsewhere. If you want to sit in an office somewhere else, out with of the Basingstoke, the Borough Council, and then say, I'm taking no responsibility whatsoever for the security or otherwise of the information, then it's your actions that are creating the sensitivity to security, etc. Now, I'm not trying to be personal, by the way, because it'll be something else next year or whatever. So I'm not trying to be, I'm trying to raise a legitimate concern that we have no protection, and if something goes wrong and the information is lost via one of your transmissions, you have no liability either. So I'm really genuinely concerned that we're effectively buying a blank, we're signing a blank check, and you can do whatever. Now, you, the auditors, that is. So I'm aghast. I nearly fell off my chair when I read this, at home, by the way, so I wasn't sure.
If I recall correctly, I think we had this discussion last year, and we can continue to have it. What I would say is that we work here as much as we can. We physically come and sit with Kevin's team, so we don't, there is no sending backwards and forwards of information that doesn't need to happen. So the team physically come and work in the building with the finance team, so we limit that as much as we can. The other thing I would say is that as part of something new we're doing this year, we have set up a new system for sharing information with the council, which is the thing that will sit in Germany, which is called Client Connect, but is basically a repository for sharing information. So, which is security protected to all of the right standards, and I'm not going to sit here and purport to be an IT guru, but has been security tested to the extent it needs to be, and is sitting within Europe, which is important because the same data protection requirements exist in Europe as they do here. So that will make the sharing of information easier, but also safer. And the other point is, whilst this paragraph is in here, we have a contract with the Audit Commission. If we were negligent, then you have every recourse that is available to you if we were negligent. It's not that you have a blank check because you don't. But if we are negligent in what we do,
Yeah.
then there are ways to deal with that.
Might I try and help a little? Because I think if this is an issue that is raised consistently, it may be that your firm may wish to take note that the current wording in what I would also concede is a relatively negative we wash our hands liability phraseology could actually benefit from a rewrite to assure your customers that you are taking all reasonable steps, that you are ISO compliant, that you are, when you're offshoring, managing the sureties of the parent country. A simple change of emphasis might actually provide more assurance to clients than simply suggesting the wording we've got here. And I know that's not in your gift, but please pass that feedback back, as it might actually help us in future to avoid these conversations. Councillor Watts.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm glad you mentioned ISO compliant. I think we would like to see a list of the standards to which this service is certified. I used to be in the certification trade, and before I got myself a proper job again, I led the first audit against BS 7799, which was then a security standard in this country, and the company audited was KPMG. And maybe we should ask all the accounting companies what they're certified to before we choose a supplier.
Okay, members, I don't have any more questions. I would point out that we will, in a future committee, have a paper regarding our future audit arrangements, as we are aware already that those are changing with the demise of the Audit Commission, so we will have an opportunity to discuss what we do in future at a future meeting. Councillor Parker.
Chair, I think my colleague was making a serious comment amid the humour, and we'd like your assertion that that's going to be the case. We will have information as to what standards this particular service is now going to be adhering to.
Yes, Councillor Parker. Sorry if I didn't reflect that. I thought we had exactly made that request, that we get a positive statement around the accreditation rather than a more back-covering statement. I was going to say something else then, but okay. Is there anything further you wish to say, members, on this particular paper? No. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and thank you very much to our external auditors for coming and being so open to our questions and responsive as well. Thank you. That takes us on to paper D. Yes, sorry, I've skipped over paper D. I was going straight on to E then. I'll ask our head of audit to introduce the paper, which is one we've talked about fraud, so this should be of interest to us, I hope. What I would take the break to say as well is I'd forgotten to mention at the start that we do have Jackie Tatum coming in for 15 minutes at the end to do the data protection update and briefing that we missed last time round. So I don't want to try and make allowance for that timing rather than send her away a second or third time. Councillor Keating.
I do need, on the basis of what you just said, to record that I have to leave here at 5:10. Thank you.
Yes, I am aware, and it's all within our gift to get you out on time. Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you. Paul, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first annual report that's been presented to members of this committee, which identifies the areas of work that the fraud team have been carrying out over the last 12 months. Hopefully it gives the members an overview of the work we've carried out, and I won't go through in detail because I'm sure you've all read it. But I'd also just like to mention that Appendix 1, which is on page 57 of 82, is Audit Commission's Protecting the Public Purse checklist, which I've actually gone through to see where the council sits with the best practice for dealing with fraud. And I've come up with I've identified a few actions that we do need to ensure we put in place over the next few months. And those actions can be found in paragraph 4.63, which is on page 55 of 82. I won't say any more than that. I'll just go straight over to questions to further from the committee.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. It's a very extensive report and actually quite illuminating in terms of what you've got in here. So I welcome it coming. I presume this will now be a regular thing. Excellent. And the second question is, I did note the legal issues involved in this, and I imagine in terms of writing it, I appreciate the getting the information across in the way that you've done it. And I did note 413, and this is the only comment, anything I want to say on the paper, full stop, really, Chair, is just the relationship to the overall figure to the one case. And I think that's something else to bring out and be aware of.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask the officer whether on the overpayment of benefits, the prosecutions, do we recover any of this money?
As far as my team are concerned, we identify the overpayment and we pass that on to the corporate debt recovery team, who will pursue the debt recovery in the normal channels.
Can I then just, Chair, ask that at some stage that we are given some indication of, because we've got to look at, I appreciate we've got to discourage fraud. It's only right that we investigate fraud, but it's this element of the prosecution and recovery in regards to cost and result. Perhaps the committee could be given some indication as to how much of this money eventually gets recovered.
Yes, certainly we can take an action to incorporate that in a future report, probably in an audit report on the annual update on progress against fraud, yes.
In which case, if it could be done, I would rather not wait another year to the next annual report in regard to this. Perhaps we can have an update from the officer, please, by email. Or
yes, certainly. Councillor Gardner next.
442 and 445. An anti-fraud and corruption staff awareness leaflet was created, and a corporate anti-fraud and corruption awareness e-learning module was out there. Any chance that that could be made available to members?
Thank you for raising that. As you can see on the table in 463, which is on page 55, we have one of the actions which is fraud awareness training or updates to members. And that was something we were going to discuss as a stewardship team, but I think if this committee would be happy for that e-learning module to be passed to councillors, then we can, all means, see if we can get that passed around for all members as part of their training on fraud.
Certainly the module, but the leaflet presumably is available now, and that could be emailed to us. And, well, I'd hate for it to be insecure. And on page 60 of 62, para 14, staff have confidence in the confidentiality of these arrangements, confidence that concerns raised will be addressed, no reason to believe that they do not. Is that just putting a positive spin on the fact you don't know? And isn't there some way that they could be asked?
That's right. We have no evidence to say that they have no concerns over it. So yes, it's a trying to put a positive twist on it, but I don't know. No, that's fine.
Thank you for that. So an action arising out of that is about circulating the e-module of the training and the more immediate fraud awareness update. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at, and there will be a theme in this. There's a common features. On the page 58 of 82, item 7, it says have we assessed our management of counter-fraud work against good practice? Well, we've done some of it. That's fine. I understand that. Further action completed. And my question is, can we have a timescale to that, please? Because otherwise, it's uncertain. And the next one is item number 8 on the same page. It says further action to involve elected members, consideration to be given. My comment here is do it. That's an expression of my view, by the way. It's not an instruction. But nonetheless, my view is giving consideration to something at this point is probably a bit late. We ought to be doing something more than that. Okay. And again, if you go over the page to page 59, it's item 12. Do we have arrangements in place to encourage staff to raise their concerns? Presumably, that could be whistleblowing, or it could be just raising concerns. And it says, again, the common law manager is currently drafting a policy, and that's good. And the next question that I would have for that particular issue would be when. Going over the page again to actual numbers, page 60. You've already answered the question. You said you've got no evidence either way. My question is, are we looking for evidence? And if you're not, should we? If you see what I mean. Now, I don't know the answers, by the way, but I'm raising the query on the basis that it's uncertain in my head, so it might raise a question in your head. And I then go down to item 16, further action, create something. Again, doesn't say when.
Councillor Keating, sorry, I don't wish to interrupt your flow, and please continue when I've... In the interest of trying to be helpful here, I think on in the main report 4.6.3 there's a table that shows some of the effective dates of these actions. I think it would be helpful though if in a future iteration of the checklist the two were brought together, because I think I'm struggling the same as you. It's sort of like some information is in one part of the report and not in the table. So as you know, it's the first time we've seen it, and it's really helpful. But I think it would help to bring those two together. So sorry to interrupt. I was just trying to...
I'm not intending to be critical. I'm intending to be, if you like, to complete the issue in my head. There's no point in you saying we're going to do something if I then have to wait a year to remember that you said you're doing something, and I can't remember you promised it. You know, so all I'm looking for is completing the information. And I did start by saying there was a theme, and that is it. And same applies to item 24. And that completes my list of thank you and comments, and thank you.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. I think that, the points well made again, and just reflecting the two bits of information in the same place will help us, not just in a year's time, but any other interim period we need to review things. I don't have any other questions at the moment. Members, you are open to debate if you wish, or not. So, Councillor Gardner, don't feel forced to if you don't need to, but...
Well, we have talked about member engagement in this, and I'd just like to say that yes, we ought to have it. How soon can we have it? And exactly what form will it take?
I can bring an update report to committee if they wish. I can do it in whichever format best suits the committee.
I think we've been asked to make a suggestion there. Councillor Parker.
Well, I'm assuming this is an all members thing, not just members of this committee. And so, because I'm of the belief that members haven't yet had any registered or recorded training in this area. We're not talking about updates, we're talking about a program of an initial training. So I think we just leave that with officers to come forward with a program, but I think what we are saying, possibly as a committee, as early as possible, please, rather than letting it roll on and not being attended to quickly.
Just to help
There's a
before Councillor
priority.
Keating comes back. So I think where we're at the moment is this report would come back to us for a formal update in 12 months' time. We've already asked for an interim report back on some of the items, the recovery items, as raised by Councillor Parker. In terms of training, there's a target date for all members by 31st of July. And I think, again, that's coming from the item in 4.6.3. And I think, again, there's a request from this committee that we perhaps are ahead of the curve in that, although I pick up Councillor Gardner's point that if the e-learning module or the current existing awareness information that staff have benefit of is shared with us in the first instance, that would at least get us off first base, I should suspect. If there are any other suggestions of things we need to do, then I'm happy to take them. I know you had something to say, Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I genuinely have no wish to be trained to the level of any fraud officer. Okay? It's because I'm not a fraud officer. I'm a councillor, so I'm a generalist. Okay? That means I'm no expert in anything. And I can live with that. I have no problem living with that. But it does mean I don't want a training module which says this is the package for a fraud officer. And I just want to make sure at this point that we're not going to end up getting that.
No, you have my assurance, Councillor Keating, and maybe that was loose words on my part. The module that goes out to all staff is an awareness briefing where they have to go in, work through a series of questions and responses that both gives them information about how to spot and manage fraud, how to report it if it's identified, how they get the support of management. That's the kind of training that we need, and I absolutely take on board. None of us want to become specialist fraud officers, but we do need to understand how to deal with it and how to identify it. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Aside from that, are there any other comments, members? No. So, yes. Thank you very much for the report and. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that. That takes us on then to paper E, which is a rather familiar paper, I believe. It's the quarterly Treasury Management Monitoring Report, and this is for quarter 3. Yeah, there we are. Perfect timing. So I shall ask Dean to introduce the paper. Yes, you're on. Go on.
Thank you very much. This is paper E on page 63 of 82. This is part of your regular Treasury Management Monitoring reports. It's the report for quarter 3. Really, there's not a lot to say. It's very little change from the forecast from the mid-year report that you had. We're still forecasting a shortfall of £314,000, which we will be. The intention is to meet that from the interest rate risk reserve, which was the reserve that we set up some time ago specifically to deal with in-year surpluses and shortfalls. You might have noticed there's been an addition to the lending criteria. We've added Svenska Handelsbanken, who are a Swedish bank, based on their credit rating and the fact that they're not in the Eurozone. There's been a supranational bond that's matured in December, which was with the World Bank for £12 million, and we haven't reinvested that in the long term. We're still not doing any long-term investment at the moment, pending the sort of approval of the strategy for the coming year. That's all I had to say. If you've got any questions, I'll try to do my best to answer them. Thank you.
Members? Councillor Leake.
2 questions. The first is on power 15.3 on page 75 of 82, which told us about, or told us that the Cabinet had training. I did actually ask how many members of the Cabinet attended that training. I don't think I've ever had a reply. This is fairly repetitive stuff. We've seen it before, but I would like to know, just to make sure they all attended. The second point, since we've just had the comment about the euro, do we have any contingency plans should Scotland leave the United Kingdom, because the Royal Bank of Scotland and Bank of Scotland might find they haven't got a currency?
Apologies. I think we'd missed the point about the members of the cabinet who had attended training, but we will get a written response to you ahead of the next committee, and we'll park your other comment for now, if you don't mind. But it doesn't stop you asking. I've got Councillor Gardner, Councillor Parker. Councillor Gardner.
Something fairly trivial, but 3.5, the code also requires that local authorities have a separate body or committee responsible for the monitoring and scrutiny of the Treasury function. Can we just make sure that the Constitutional Working Party are reminded of this in any reorganisation of committees?
Yes, we can do that. Okay, thank you. Yes.
For the record, Chair,
Yes.
I think we do need to say on record that the Constitutional Working Party has got no difficulty with having an AGA for doing a council matter of that nature, and we have agreed to do so.
Thank you. That's helpful, Councillor Keating. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two, possibly three questions. I'd like to go back to the training, the issue of the training, and just ask, the training that was delivered to the Cabinet, was that in the same way linked, we have ours linked to a meeting, was that delivered prior to a Cabinet meeting?
It was after a Cabinet briefing. It was on the same day as a Cabinet briefing, but it was a separate session.
Could I refer you to 6.5, page 70 of 82, and just query with you the valuation that was given to the 3EN investment MWR, which, from my understanding, a figure of £75,000 is lower than what was indicated at some time, I believe, by our auditors, or we had a much higher figure. We had some debate and discussion as to what the true value of this investment was, and I'm surprised to see the book figure being put down as 75,000.
The 75,000 is the original cost of the investment. So when the investment was originally made in that company, the investment was for £75,000. The carrying value in our books at the moment is the 385, and that's based on, I can't say too much because obviously we're actually in the process of selling the shares, but it's based on an offer that was made to us back in December.
Yes, I do apologise, Chair, to the committee members. I've got my figures wrong. It was the 385. Yes, I understand exactly, and thank you for making that clear, Dean. But that figure, I believe we had some indication that that was potentially a lot higher than 385. My concern then is if we're saying, based on recent purchaser offer, it would indicate, is there a possibility that are we offloading this investment or this asset at lower than value?
Yeah.
A bit like the government selling off the post office.
Yeah, I think I'm going to sort of add a note of caution here in terms of where we are currently in the process of discussion or settlement on this in terms of the sales. There is a confidential paper with portfolio holder at the moment, or coming.
Sorry, Chair. There's actually been a portfolio holder report and decision. So there is a report on the members' portal that members can look at. Obviously, it contains a confidential appendix which which has the value on it, but members can see that. So the information is there for, and we can give you the reference number after the meeting, but the report is out there to get that information.
Yeah, so I think it's signposting information elsewhere that I don't necessarily want to discuss in a public session today. Yeah.
Something. If it's okay, the valuation that you saw was the external valuation that we had done on the shares when they transferred across to the council. And that was based on an external expert looked at it, and that was based on a whole, basically somebody coming in buying the whole company, and that's what our sort of share of that type of transaction would have been. What's actually happening at the moment is not a takeover or somebody buying the company. It's actually somebody buying the minority shareholding that we have. The value of a minority shareholding is not the same as the value of a whole company being sold. So there is a difference between those valuations.
Again, thank you, Dean. I completely follow that. Can I, Chair, then just make this point yet again, which I believe I've made previously, when I'm told that this very important aspect of dealing with a financial asset is being brought to the attention, or really I would say not brought to the attention, it appears on members' portal. I really think this should be handled in a different way. There should be some other way of bringing we don't all, I'm afraid, sit scanning the members' portal for this type of information. I'm amazed it wasn't brought specifically, or some note to say, look at the members' portal. Others may not agree with me.
That's certainly something we should consider for a future response. Yeah. Councillor Gard. No, I apologise. Councillor Watson, then Councillor Gard.
Just on that subject, I mean,
sure.
Who's going to decide what is important and what isn't important? I personally just every day we get a little thing saying members consultation, and I have a quick look and see whether it's of interest. But I mean, who's going to decide whether something that is on there is so important members have to be emailed? I mean, you would have to actually email and tell us every single one, because somebody would prove that it was important to them. We either have this Sinbad or whatever it's called or not.
Yeah, I think there is a point there, but I think in terms of how we determine what's important to each of us individually, however, some items do come up in committee, and certainly this is one item we have discussed in previous committees as generating some interest more broadly than individuals. So yeah, okay, yeah. On this point, Councillor Harvey, yes. Okay, fine, sure. Councillor, well, I've got Councillor Watts and Councillor Gardner, but are you prepared to wait, because Councillor Watts is ahead of you, Councillor Gardner, so you're happy to make your point? Yep. So, go on then.
Well, two things. I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, that the 385 is net of all commissions. And I think when we originally talked about, we were probably told the pre-commission figure, which is why it was higher. And I picked up the issue of this through the cabinet agenda, and I just looked at the decision notices which were coming out and took it from there.
Thank you, Councillor Watts.
Perhaps Councillor Leake was being facetious, but I just mentioned that Lloyds Bank is also registered in Scotland.
Okay, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. This really is the Scottish question, isn't it? Anyway, moving.
Let's try and avoid the Scottish question this afternoon. Thank you.
One of the issues I think this raises, and it's something that we need to feed back into the Constitutional Working Party, is the administration's desire, I think, to have less decisions run through the committee system and more decisions taken, which is all well and good. But if we're going to pick decisions up like this, and colleagues are right in terms of describing where you see this, where do you see it, where do you pick it up, and then how is it referred or not for debate if it's an issue that you want. If the executive is simply getting on and making decisions and not everything is going to committee, then the catch-all, either through call-in or refer to committee, becomes incredibly important. And I think, the views of the members this afternoon on this is really important to be expressed at the Constitutional Working Party, because, we're sat here having a discussion and other members have other ideas about what should and shouldn't be brought to committee. And obviously this one in particular has raised a question.
I think, I take the point, but I also take the point that there is a parallel piece of work that's looking at generally decision-making powers, the committee structures, and how we choose to have information. On the one hand, I accept the need for flagging up important things that go through the decision-making process. But again, I also take the point that we're trying to get as much as possible transparent and visible using technology. So we're always going to be in that sort of level to which you self-serve versus which things are flagged up. So I think any, by all means, feeding things back to the Constitutional Working Party, but any further then opportunity to comment on that when the Working Party recommendations come out will help us move this forward. Councillor Harvey.
Just very quickly, the one lesson I'm taking away from this, from what everybody has said, is that speed isn't always of the essence in making a decision. Democracy should fit in there somewhere.
Yep, point is taken. Councillor Parker.
I just want to make sure is that we're going into any debate. I'd like to make a comment to the content. It isn't necessarily a question.
You can rest assured that completes my list of people who'd signal to ask questions. So we are at that point of debate. And if you wish to go first, Councillor Parker.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would like just to refer members to 3.3 on page 68 of 82, which gives us the Council's Treasury Management Policy objectives. And I would like just to say that I'm disappointed. I've mentioned this before, and I would like to ask, how do I progress that one of the Council's Treasury Management Policy objectives is to not knowingly allow investments to be made in economies where there are known human rights issues. I mean, if you read these objectives, I mean, they're pretty standard, aren't they? We're not going to perhaps put out a suggestion that we would not want to invest prudently. I understand the debate about it's not easy to influence this, but there's still no reason why it cannot be an objective.
I think we're suffering a matter of timing here. That was certainly a recommendation of this committee when we last met, and the recommendation was a comment. Yes, sorry, comment, and that comment was taken to the new policy document, which is going before Council on Thursday. So I think the opportunity to further raise that and comment on the policy papers that we see on Thursday is the appropriate timing to do that. So essentially we've had the discussion here, we've made our comments. The level to which they are taken forward now rests on Thursday's meeting.
Out of courtesy, can I give then prior notice to the Chair of Audit a question at Council?
Gee, thanks. But I appreciate the courtesy, and I will prepare an answer. Thank you. Members, I don't have anyone else signalled to speak at the moment. No. Thank you very much then. Thank you very much for the update. That's drawing this meeting to a close. And before you all rush away, we're now going to ask Jackie to come and give us a 15-minute update on data protection. I think one of the issues that comes out of this session is specifically around training and how people become aware. As you're aware, we are all required to register with the Information Commissioner. That raises some issues for all of us and more issues for some than others. And I think what I'd ask Jackie to do is come and give us a brief update. And then she, I think, has some questions for us in terms of how we wish to manage the training and awareness updates going forward so that we are on top of such important issues and we don't fall foul of legislation. So I'll take a breath of 5 minutes and we'll just wait for Jackie to join us. Thank you for attending though. Thank you.